Hi, this is Paul, and this is Rough Draft for Sunday, where I run through the current status of my sermon. Privilege is a fairly popular word right now, and it comes in all sorts of different varieties, and you'll be hard-pressed to find anybody more privileged than a guy like Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom is currently the governor of the state of California with his lovely family, wife number 2, who's also very famous and talented and out there doing things in the world in her own right. And that's wife number 2. And wife number 1, also very beautiful and famous and talented, but sort of on the wrong side of the political aisle. She used to be on Fox News, and then for a while was a candidate for the press secretary for the Trump administration. Privilege is a very interesting thing, and it's been playing in interesting ways in our culture. I've had kinds of trouble with my software lately. There's lots of ways to talk about privilege, money, power, and fame. You seem to, however, get a pass if your politics are progressive enough. Gavin Newsom is a very wealthy man. He's a multi-millionaire businessman, made his money in the wine industry and in other places, and he's a career public servant with anybody who doesn't notice his clear ambitions for the White House. You're not paying attention. Now, it used to be that the Trump family was my go-to sermon illustration, but I sort of cut them out of the loop once they got into the White House, which, of course, seemed to be a rather far-fetched. But they, too, seem to have privilege dripping all over the place. And usually when I make political illustrations, I like to use both sides of the aisle, because more often than not, both sides of the aisle are a lot more alike than they are different, despite all of our political bickering. And the message sort of out there is that God is against privilege. And I'm not sure that idea is terribly biblical. In fact, actually, privilege and status runs through the Bible in many, many different ways. And Jesus tends to engage in conversations and does things with respect to status and prestige and privilege in many surprising ways. And this is illustrated often in the Old Testament, where wealth and success are often considered signs of God's favor. This is very much taken up in the stories of the patriarchs, and especially in the book of Job. Job seems to get it both ways, because on one hand, all his wealth and success was a sign of God's favor, and then when it was all taken away, it was clearly seen as a sign of God's disfavor, and God in fact steps in and says, "Don't judge me so simplistically. It is not this simple." One story in the New Testament where this comes about, in fact, questions of status and prestige are run through the Gospels in many, many ways if we pay attention. We've been reading through these stories in Mark 4 and 5. When Jesus had crossed again on the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him. He was by the sea. And again, all of this talk that we've been doing about the symbolism of the book of Mark is important. This isn't just telling us a little tidbit of geography. Jesus is by the sea. The sea is this place of chaos and opportunity. He recruits catchers of fish, because they are the ones who go out into the sea and bring life out of death. And so we've had a lot of stories around the sea, and again it seems like we're by the sea. And this story, too, is by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, here's a man of status, could also very well have been a man of wealth. And he comes to Jesus, and he came, and when he saw him, he fell at Jesus' feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come lay your hands on them so that she may be well and live." There's nothing like death to level our ideas of privilege or status or prestige. This Jairus quite likely would have perhaps kept his distance from Jesus, but here he's begging him at his feet. Everyone there would have seen that and understood what that meant in terms of status and privilege and Jesus. So Jesus went with him, and a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Everybody wanted to watch. Everybody wanted to see. This had the attention of everyone. Now there was a woman who had suffered from hemorrhages for 12 years. Now, in terms of status and prestige, this woman was at the other end. It's quite likely that this woman had been basically socially debilitated for perhaps half of her adult life, because a hemorrhage like this would have made her ceremonially unclean, and in a circumstance like that, she would have had to avoid public contact. In fact, some highly observant people would avoid contact with women at all. She would have had to have, in some ways, lived her life sort of like a leper, and she had been doing this for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had. So now she's not only a woman who is socially ostracized and poor, and in a sense doesn't have even the social cutaway role that a leper might have, someone who could obviously beg. She had a very humiliating and perhaps humiliating, but definitely ostracizing situation. And she was no better, and it grew worse. This illness was a disaster to her ability to enjoy community. She couldn't be anywhere where someone might come into contact with her, because she would make them ceremonial unclean, and they would then have to go through the rigmarole of ceremonial washing to once again join community. And so what should she do? She heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd. This is something she should not have done. And she touched his cloak. This is very much something she should not have done. But she, like Jairus, was desperate. Jairus was at the top of the social status. He had all the privilege. She had none. She broke the rules. She touched his cloak, for she said, perhaps to herself, if I but touch his clothes, I will be made well. Now this is dramatic, and it's hard for us to know just how to think about this. Is this the way Jesus works? We tend to think of Jesus and his miracles and his power as something under his conscious control. But is Jesus sort of like a talisman or a magic wand or a miracle drug that just touching him, even unsolicited, even in a way that would be very much looked down upon? This is sort of like smacking someone to get something from them. Could she just slip away with a piece of Jesus' power? And even if you buy the whole Christian idea of miracles, what on earth does this mean about Jesus and his godhood and how miracles are supposed to work? Is Jesus magical? This is a strange story. Well, this software is just all wrong. Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately, aware that power had gone forth from him. I like the way the NRSV lays this out. Straightway, and we talked about that earlier when we looked at some of the early Mark passages, he was aware that power, dunamis, had gone forth from him. How is this working? How does this work with consciousness? How does this stuff how are we supposed to think about this? Jesus turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" You're the Son of Man. Shouldn't you know? You're the Son of God. Shouldn't you be aware of this? Aren't you supposed to know everything? Where exactly are the lines between your humanity and your divinity? Is this something you're play acting in order for her sake? What is going on with this story? Now the disciples said to him, what do you mean? Someone is touching him. You can see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say someone touched me? All kinds of people are touching me. But here, in this rather mental moment. So is faith a mental thing? Would it have been enough for her to have her faith in Jesus? Must she have touched him for it to work? All kinds of other people are touching him. Don't they have designs on him? Don't they have sick people, illnesses or cancers or sick things in their life? Why the combination of a mental perspective, a little mental dialogue she made, and her desire to break the rules and touch him? What about that means power goes out from him unwillingly, unconsciously, to a person he doesn't know? This is, again, if you go through these stories, we get so, they become so domesticated to us. This is truly strange. He looked around to see who had done it. How is he supposed, is this something that he can see on them? Will she glow? But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, she has a conscience, came in fear and trembling. What's he going to say? Did she just pick Jesus' miracle pocket? Is that how this works? And fell down before him. Well, who else just fell down before him? Wasn't that Jairus? And she told the whole truth. Did she have to? Couldn't he have known it? How will he respond to this? In the rules of the book of Moses, she just made him and a whole bunch of other people ceremonially unclean, and they now will have to go through some ritual washing. But we've seen before with Jesus, that's not how Jesus works. Unlike everything else in the Mosaic law, if an unclean thing touches a clean thing, the clean thing becomes unclean. But Jesus, even seemingly apart from his will, makes things clean by contact. It doesn't work that way, as everyone who knew the law of Moses would know. But pay attention, this fear, well, this is showing up in every one of our stories. When he stilled the storm, after the storm is stilled, they look at Jesus in terror. Who is this man? What is he? And Legion, Jesus came and saw the demon-possessed man sitting there, clothed and in his right mind. It wasn't Legion who was terrified of him. It was the crowd. Who is this person who can do this? This woman has something to fear. She's, in a sense, picked Jesus' miracle pocket and wonders, how will he respond to her? He said to her, daughter. Now, this woman may very well be older than he is. Why does he call her daughter? Is it the way of daughters to steal from their parents? Is it the way of daughters to pick their pockets? Your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. Now, I didn't point out earlier, I should have. Maybe I'll change it. Because the language here, the word here, is saved. She's looking to be saved. Your faith has saved you. What does that mean? Go in peace. Daughter. Is faith this little mental dialogue and then sneaking up and daring enough to pick his pocket? And he doesn't respond in anger. He seemingly approves. Because she didn't have much to lose. But Jairus has everything to lose. He's humiliated himself. He's taken a lower status in front of the crowd. And now Jesus has been delayed. While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's home and said, your daughter. Oh, another daughter. We've had 2 people bow down before Jesus. And 2 daughters in trouble. This daughter is dead. The woman with the hemorrhage was in some sense dead to the community. She was unclean. She was unclean like a dead person. Now we have a girl who is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? He can't do anything like this. These people coming from the leader's house, they don't have faith. They're not desperate. They're not bowing down. But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, do not fear. The woman just feared. Don't be afraid. He could have said that to the woman. Don't be afraid. I understand why you're afraid, but don't do it. See me. Don't see your fear. Only have faith. And it's in the imperative. Now again, in English, we use this word believe and faith, and that sometimes trips us up in terms of things like propositional belief. Well, this is a different kind of belief. This perhaps is more it's the participatory a little bit, but it's probably the procedural. Have procedural faith. You fell down before me. You made a request of me. You might have imagined that being a synagogue ruler and some of the tension between the synagogue rulers and Jesus, which will come full force later on. You might have imagined that I would turn my back on you because I'm your political enemy, as so you think. But I'm not worried about your privilege, especially when you come bowing down. He allowed no one to follow him. No show here, except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And when they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he took the fishermen into the sea of the chaos of the death in this room. And they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue. He saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. That was the protocol. You get the mourners there. She's got to get buried within 24 hours. When he had entered, he said to them, why does he talk to them this way? Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping. Jesus almost plays the clown here, and they laugh at him. Then he put them all outside, and he took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. Chaos is in this room. Death is in this room. And he took her by the hand, and he said to her, Talitha, cum, which means, little girl, get up. And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years old. Notice, the woman had the illness, the hemorrhage for 12 years. A whole life this little girl had led. The chaos of the woman's disease, the chaos of this little girl's death. He brings the fishermen in, and with a word, he stilled the storm. He calls her back to life. At this, they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this, and he told them to get her something to eat. And I love that. He thinks about her well-being. They're all probably shocked, and it's like, get her something to eat. Okay? Now, just as with the woman, touching the dead body would make him ceremonially unclean. Why not Jesus? You see, ceremonially unclean was chaos spreading. Jesus, with a word, is bringing order out of chaos. This is Genesis 1. I'll hear people say to me sometimes, well, it's only in the fourth gospel that Jesus is God. And I always think, you're not reading the gospel anywhere near closely enough. The symbolism is here. The language is here. All the symmetry is here. Jesus is the creator. And he can make dead girls alive. And he can heal women that the doctors can't help. Now, we play our status games. Well, Jesus should help this person and not that person. And that's what we do. But now, this faith. And notice the form the faith takes. Notice how they act in faith. They're on their knees, and they're coming to Jesus, and they're saying, I'm willing to lose my status. I'm willing to lose my privilege. I'm willing to lose all of this because I'm desperate and in need. See, the age of decay levels us all. Jairus was desperate enough to kneel before Jesus publicly. Mourners give up too early. It's not their daughter. Nothing will keep that desperate woman from Jesus. How far apart our faith and desperation. The problem with privilege is really that so often it keeps us from Jesus. Now, all you really need is need, and there's a whole lot more need in this world than there is our ability to satisfy it. Nothing that you have, money or wealth, power or privilege, will help. He is willing, and he is able. Will you come to him? How would that woman have felt about Jesus for the rest of her life? Remember the demoniac from last week? This woman, for the rest of her life, will tell people what Jesus had done for her. How would that desperate mother and father have felt about Jesus? The daughter probably just remembered that nice man who woke her up and told him to give her something to eat. But the parents, oh, they knew. Oh, look how people respond to a doctor. Think of how they would respond to Jesus. Now, go and live this way.